63mm by 88mm, the dimensions of a magic card. You would be forgiven for thinking that there's not much to be done with that space, but time and again R&D have pushed the boundaries of what is possible. Regardless of whether it's a success or a failure, these innovations are always turning points and have produced some of the most flavourful cards in the game. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things magic, flavour, design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And we are here today. We are going to be talking about flip cards and double-faced cards.
Flipping flip cards.
All of these different things. Yeah, basically, last week when we were doing the episodes where we were talking about our flavour commanders, what we want to see moving forwards, and all that kind of stuff, we spoke a lot about vampires and about werewolves. And one of the big things about vampires and werewolves is that they have quite a long tradition of double-faced cards or double-sided cards, where you have the one creature on the front and then a creature on the back. As we all know, I have some huge love affair with the Planeswalker Island Cord as well, and she is also a flip card or a double face card. And so we wanted to just talk about maybe like the history of them, like how did we get to a point where we had these double face cards, what the flavour of them is like, because as Magic cards go, as like a kind of, well, I mean, would you call it a mechanic? I was about to say as mechanics go, it's pretty flavourful.
It is definitely a mechanic, yeah, 100%.
Yeah? I suppose the word is transform.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Is that these what we're going to talk about today, all the different mechanics that affect affect the card physically. If you know what I mean. So like these are all like physical actions that you kind of have to take to use them, and it's kind of it adds like. I guess it's one of those things that I would call it a mechanic because, as I say, it has specific words that are tied to it, whether it's flip, transform, all those kinds of things. And they also have specific rules based on them for some of the split cards. So I definitely think it's a mechanic for sure.
Yeah, 100%. But before we get to talking about the double face cards, I mean, we call them flip cards colloquially, but officially they're not flip cards. There's actually a long tradition of Wizards trying out different formatting with different card designs and with different use of space on bits of cardboard, which led us to the double face cards. Some of them will be parallel, so they're not just getting rid of one to format another. Some of them they tried in the past, and they've now decided that they're not going to do them anymore. So it's going to be a little bit of a history lesson, and then we're going to cap off with sort of what we think is the most flavorful aspects, maybe some of the fails as well of double face cards, and why maybe they're not used in as many sets as we think they could be. But before we dive into that, Nathan, before we get too deep into it, I today got my hands on the Ikoria products that have been finally released in paper. Yeah. I haven't opened up my bundle. So I got a bundle, a pre-release kit, and a pre-con deck. I haven't opened up the bundle or pre-release kit yet, but I did open up and quickly sleeve my Cathril Aspect Warper pre-con, because we might be doing some games later on where it's just the pre-con games. And I completely forgot, because I just, obviously, Commander products only come out once a year, that they have this little insert inside, which gives you a little bit of a lore background on the legendary creatures, and sometimes it's fuck all, and sometimes it's quite in depth. Do you want to hear just the quick like 20-second blurbs of like each of the legendary creatures that's going on?
Yeah, go on. Because I think it'll give, if it does the partners as well, we'll get a little bit of insight as to what the hell's going on with the yeah, cool. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, cool. So Cathril Aspect Warper. This is from the little pullout, the little leaflet. Cathril is an insect nightmare that lurks in the peaty marshes of Indartha. It uses the shifting adaptive tendrils on its body to mimic the other creatures and deceive would-be predators. Many a monster hunter, seeing only a big bug, has ventured after what they thought was easy prey, a mistake they've rarely lived to learn from. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like there are idiots in Ikoria. If you see that giant, there is no point you see that sitting on a rock there and going, yeah, easy prey. It's not easy prey. Bug. That is, I'm sorry, Ikorians are idiots. There is no way you go, yum, there's lunch. Then you go, no, thank you, lunch is 48 miles in the other direction, thank you.
Exactly. The next one is Tayam, Luminous Enigma. Tayam is a strange reclusive creature with a mysterious connection to Ikoria's crystals. No one has been able to document the exact nature of the connection, which is an unusual event even among monsters. Some speculate that Tayam can control the crystal's effects on other creatures in some way, and scholars are desperate to witness this power in action. Pretty
Interesting.
cool. So
Mm.
so TM gives things. Is it a vigilance counter? I think
I
yeah.
believe so. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
so
so.
that
Yeah.
that directly ties in. So he's able to manipulate crystals to mutate other creatures at his whim, which is
Mm.
pretty fucking cool. I think
That
that's
is
kind
quite
of cool.
cool. I like this idea of if they're using maybe the ways that the creatures communicate together to give these, because we didn't really have like a mechanical tie into why keyword counters. I know the whole mutation thing works, but then how can you put an intimidate counter on like a human creature, which you could
Yeah.
technically? And the only way I can think of it is this idea of communication, of where you learn things from other species that allow you
Mm.
to. I mean, obviously, you can't just go, "Oh, I've just spoken to a bird telepathically. Now I can fly." But I mean, there might be some aspects of that to it, I guess.
And the last is Nikara, Lair Scavenger, and Yannick, Scavenging Sentinel. So Nikara and Yannick are both outsiders and loners, misunderstood by their home communities. They are bonded only to each other, and they rely on their companionship to help them survive Ikoриa's harsh, monster-riddled wilderness. From their point of view, there are few you can trust to have your back, but the ones you can do without hesitation. Bit boring.
Yeah, it doesn't give you anything. So I was all excited about, oh, we're going to find out some nuance. No, it just went, they're renegades. Yeah, fight the system. Great.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool, fine. Cool, whatever. I will say, like when you said about the, I've already forgotten the name of it. The second one, that there is a
Tam.
certain like mystery to the cat. Like I like that the way that the Ikorean cats all kind of look, especially the ones that are a bit more like Ghibli fantasy esque. I know I said last episode it reminds me a lot of Princess Mononoke, the spirit of the forest, but
Is Tam a nightmare cat? Are you thinking of Nethroi,
no,
the
no, no, no.
apex
I'm thinking
one?
of the one where the I'm going to call it lieutenant, even though it's not.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
looking
yeah,
up
yeah.
towards the sky, and it's got luminous, but little
It's actually
notes.
holding crystals.
Yeah,
it's got like these tendrils that are coming
yeah.
out
And
of it,
it's
a
got
bit
little,
like
it's got like
Kappa.
motes on the end of it, hasn't it? Almost like anglerfish, where they're
Hmm.
lit right at the end. I think
Yeah,
if I remember. Yeah, and either way, they look really cool. It's really ethereal. Like I don't know. I mean, I would have an absolute amazing safari day on Ikoria. I'm not gonna lie. Apart from the fact that they're mutating and trying to kill you. Um,
you'd be a hunter.
I don't know. I'd be a bonder all day, all day. Fuck that.
Hmm.
I'm not. I don't want to kill him. Why would I want to kill him?
You just said safari.
Oh yeah, I forget that's what safari is. I mean, like Pokemon. Oh, okay. That's also you're still catching them.
You catch them, yeah, and
Yeah, but
enslave
you
them.
don't go. You don't catch. If I go on an African safari now, I don't go and hunt wildebeest, do I? I just go and have a look at the animals, right? I'm not a
Hmm.
poacher.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I say that. I mean, it's just because I don't know. I like the look of all these cats. I really want a cat. Nathan wants a flying fox bonded creature, obviously.
Of
But
course.
yeah, with all the products coming out now, I have spent most of my day just looking through the various cards and going, right. So what decks can these go in? All I know about Magic these days is they're making too many good cards that go into decks that I don't have enough space for, and it's going to get to a point where I don't play anything that's older than 5 years.
Mm.
Like, it's just ridiculous. I'm just like, well, this just replaces all of the old cards. I did this is one thing I think could be interesting to those that have like a large swath of decks and maybe you've been building for a long time. Is have a little look through the decks you've built recently and check to see what years your cards are from. Because I was doing this with Chilane earlier. I kind of finished my Chilane deck today by adding Eternal Witness to it. And I was looking through to see what like the oldest cards I had in it was. Apart from a random snow-covered forest that I have from Ice Age, it turns out to be Shield Sphere from Alliances, and then Shrieking Drake from Visions.
You used to have a beta Llanowar Elves, didn't
I
you?
did, yeah. I've still got a revised one in my Pier and Toothy deck. But yeah, I sold the beta Llanowar Elves, poor thing. It did not deserve my lack of double sleeving. It needed to be traded in for some money for Magic Fest. So
Well, yeah, it funded your London Magic Fest, didn't
it
it? Which
funded a
it funded the
lot
whole
of
thing.
lot of random things that are now in decks that cause harm to people. Yeah, so it did well.
Mm.
Did well, the little fella. But yeah, so Ikoria is out. Have a look through. There's loads of shit. There's loads of stuff.
Yeah, it's really
Absolutely
cool.
tons of stuff. But that's not what we're talking about today.
That's not no. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through not super linear because things kind of chop and change, but we're going to go through some of the major examples of where wizards have used the card stock space, the physical card itself, how they've changed the formatting of it to try and fit more, try and do more, and what we think about each of these different things.
Not when
Some
they
of them were.
eventually gave up and went, nah, let's just put it on the back as well. There's not
Let's
enough
just put it on the
space.
back. But without jumping to the very fucking end of this episode, I think the double-faced cards, having something on the back and something on the front, out of all the examples of how they've used space, is by far and away the most fun and most interesting. But
Yeah.
some people really don't like it. I think I say this almost every episode, but it's true. Some people really hate the double-faced cards thing, and some examples more than others. But so let's start. Let's start all the way back in Kamigawa
Mm.
block. So Kamigawa, champions, betrayers, and saviors were the names when in the ancient days for you whippersnappers. They used to do 3 sets for each block,
Yeah,
and
2,000
those
years ago when this magic set was released.
yeah, exactly. And what they had in Kamigawa was something which I don't think they'd really done this before. This isn't the first time that they had messed with cardstock, but this is the first time that they did something really bonkers. And it was they had what these are called flip cards. So we're going to use the word flip cards as colloquialism for almost all of these things. But these ones, if you look on, like, say, if you look on MTG, the wiki, or if you talk to people like using magic slang, flip cards are the Kamigawa cards.
Yeah.
And the way they worked was is that they were basically like a two-headed card. So you had a type line at the top with the name of the card. And you had artwork and a text box. And then that took up half the card moving down. And then on the other half of the card was a upside down image, whereas if you physically flipped the card round, or I prefer the term rotated it, because you don't flip it, you rotate it. So if you rotate the card around, you would have, again, a name at the top, artwork, and a text box that would then be the right way up. And they changed how they did these between the different sets. So in Champions, they had creatures that turned into legendary creatures, what they considered characters into heroes. In Betrayers, they had creatures or characters that turned into spirits. And then in Saviors of Kamigawa, they had legendary monk creatures that turned into enchantments. And so the idea is I guess, throughout all of these is that because Kamigawa, I mean, Nathan, you can correct, because Kamigawa is your kind of big thing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Kamigawa was a set completely based around legendary creatures and like the legendary mechanic, if you were.
Yeah, they went ham. they went ham, bologna, pepperami, and chorizo. They
Yeah,
went
yeah.
they went to town.
The idea of these like regular creatures kind of ascending into legendary status, and then all having legendary monks kind of transcend through sort of spiritualism into being enchantments,
Mm.
like, was super flavorful. Can you tell me why people hated it? Because people really don't like it.
Okay, yeah. So I think my main preface for this whole episode, and it's good that it starts with Kamigawa because I think Kamigawa did something very, very clever that is the main reason why they came back to this, and that's that you kind of want that the main reason why flip cards work so well and everything is that because it relies so much on telling a story just through a card. You can tell stories through multiple cards. You can tell stories throughout an entire set, but these were stories that almost got told from beginning to end across just across one card, an entire story across one card, which was very, very interesting from a flavor point of view. The reason why people didn't like these is because it just looked really weird. In the same way, we eventually come to talking about Innistrad, but I said this last week that there was like an aversion almost to something new, something different that didn't necessarily look normal. And we've talked about this a few episodes as well of what constitutes looking like a magic card, in air quotes, as I do every episode. What looks like a typical magic card, and these were the first things that really just didn't. And a really good example of why these didn't necessarily work is because you don't know when when it's just 1v1, it's already annoying anyway because you're looking at the opposite side of the card that the opponent is. So the side of it that is it actually is, you're reading the right way on your side, but your opponent's reading the other side that it's not, face up to them. So
Mm.
already that's a bit annoying because you look at it as an opponent, you already look over and immediately you're reading a card that it's not, it's the other thing, and you kind of have to pick it up and spin it. The other reason is because what if you drop it back on the other side in a messy fashion when you're tapping it for attacking, and you can't remember which way was it? Did it flip last turn? Who knows? So there's lots of little memory aspects about it as well, like that. Another thing that I think really, really didn't work with this beyond the formatting when it was originally printed is that if you look at it and you go on, say, Scryfall, and this is part of the reason why I think these should be called flip cards, is because they have the word flip written on the card. When I
Sure,
was
yeah,
looking
yeah,
up all of the different Kamigawa cards, all I had to do was put flip Scryfall and it brought up all of them. Whereas with all the Innistrad ones, you put transform Scryfall, it brings up all of them. Because they use different vernacular, it allows them to kind of, sit slightly differently. And it's much easier to search them. But if you look at like the mana symbol when they're upside down, looks really weird. Like because when it's the upside down one, your mana symbol and your set symbol at the top upside down, so it looks quite strange. If you look at the new reprint of Nezumi, I think it's Nezumi Shortfang that they did. Oh no, Grave Robber, sorry, that they did in the I believe in the what's the dinosaur, the Mimeoplasm, in the Mimeoplasm deck, and they moved the set symbol in the anthology to be with the main type line halfway down, which looks even worse. So I think aesthetically not only were the cards really busy, but they were confusing. There were aspects of them that didn't look right when you were using them and playing with them. Again, tapping a card that's always going to look halfway up and halfway down is already a bit weird, you know?
Yeah, I suppose if you're attacking with if you're attacking with one of these creatures, and yeah, you go into swing in, and you naturally tap your cards to your right hand side,
Yeah,
but your opponent naturally taps them to their left hand
yeah,
side, then
exactly.
yeah, it does look a little bit
And what if
nuts.
your opponent actually taps to the right and you look over and you automatically go, "Oh, that's a 5-3 attacking," and instead it's actually a 2-3 because you've got the wrong way around. Obviously, you can communicate this, but the fact that anything that requires discussion to be immediately apparent is something that Wizards don't really like, because you shouldn't have to uncomplicate your game as a player. It should already be as uncomplicated as it needs to be mechanically. So any way for it to become a bit more difficult and not necessarily read effectively is something that Wizards won't necessarily want to keep going on, which is I think, probably the reason why they're not going to go back to these flip cards. I think aesthetically they're not too bad. Like, once you get over the fact that it's a double round card, if you look at the artworks, the way they've split some of them, it's really clever. Like there's one that the flying one that it's a 1/1, and when it gains flying, you flip it, and then when it's flipped, all your creatures have flying. There's a feather that strikes the difference in the artwork, and I guess that's another thing. The artwork is half upside down and half right way up, representing the two different characters on the card, which again aesthetically doesn't necessarily carry quite so succinctly as some cards. It does irk the eye a little bit.
The ones that I don't like mostly are the ones where it's the characters turning into other legendary creatures. I think the ones where it's say the monks turning into the enchantments and turning into like the symbols, because the way that those work is that you have your character, but then their enchantment side is a symbol rather than another figure. I think
Yeah.
those ones work quite well.
So yeah, but so you're looking at, so outside of the actual like mechanics of the game, like technicality wise, I think flavor wise, I think these are we're going to have a big section in the middle that kind of, I think, sits outside of this. I put the Kamigawa cards and the transform cards together much more closely because, as I say, they tell a story. And part of the reason why I really like these cards is the fact that you did see like your average lava, your average Aki lava runner isn't anything to write home about. It's just a random 1/1, with haste. But the fact that this specific one managed to do the specific feat then made them become known as Tok Tok Volcano Born. That I
Mm.
like, because it's almost the history of the card, like the creature itself becoming bigger than just a random goblin, becoming Tok Tok. That to me is the interesting thing. I like the fact that in Betrayers, when the characters become spirits, it's almost like they had such a strong will that when they died, their spirit lingered on. It was like an ancestor. Like in Asian cultures, there is a massive thing about having family spirits and that kind of thing. The thing about, again, saviors, where these massive icons everybody knows, when they die, they were so powerful they leave behind an enchantment that sits around. Like, these are things that I think are pretty cool. The main reason I didn't like the humans to spirits one in the middle in Betrayers is because all of them have the same effect, which is you add a key counter to it whenever you play a spirit or arcane. Then when there are at least two or more key counters on it, you flip it. That is basically just level up with extra steps, because you're adding a counter. It doesn't change the card, and then when eventually you get to a certain number of counters, it changes the card and it can't go back. I mean, to me, that was basically their preamble to level up. And because that's more of a generic effect, like the other two, both champions and saviors, they had to trigger off a specific thing that makes it feel like a real world in-game thing that actually happens. There was this thing that happened on Kamigawa that allowed this random goblin to become known as Tok Tok, and you can make that happen. Like, the fact that you're able to go through these processes and make these stories happen on the cards is part of what I think the appeal for the flip cards was. It's just a shame that it didn't necessarily work out when, gameplay and people liking them. And there was a lot of other things wrong with Kamigawa, and I think this is just one extra thing that made them harder to swallow. Whereas with something like Innistrad, it was a really popular set. So even if the transform might have irked people, it was a much easier thing to get on board with, because the rest of the set was so fun to play.
So, okay, yeah, that's a Kamigawa block. We're not going to spend too much time going through each one of these individual history lessons because we want to get to the good stuff, the double face cards. But I think it's kind of worth noting where R&D came from. R&D have said that they're not going to be doing flip cards as in the Kamigawa style again, for all the reasons that Nate's just kind of taken us through. Because I mean, I don't mind them. I think a lot of people don't mind them as much as they think they
No,
do. But
I think
gameplay
also,
wise,
yeah, transform was much more accepted. And once transform was accepted, you look back at Kamigawa cards and you go, oh, what's the issue? We have cards that are on both sides. Whereas back then you didn't have anything like this, so it was very easy to go, this is bad. Whereas now you look at them and go, oh, I can see what they were trying to do. At least they
mm,
carried on. At least they didn't just give up.
Exactly. So yeah, that's Kamigawa cards. Next, we're going to move on to split cards. Now, split cards have a huge sort of lineage, if you like, and they're still used today. It's not like split cards have gone away like the flip cards have done. The first split cards were found in Invasion block. I think I'm right in saying that. Split cards were literally what you'd think. It's where they took two different cards, and instead of putting the whole card face onto one cardboard, they put two like card faces onto the same card. So they have them along vertically as well. Not vertically, sorry. So as if you were to tap it, then you'd be able to read them sort of vertically.
Mm.
The first one's in Invasions. So these are called split cards. Had each half was a different color, and what we'll find when we talk about all these different blocks that use split cards is that their naming conventions are kind of interesting in some
Mm.
blocks, then in other ones they're not so interesting. What
Yeah.
we'll see most of the time is that the naming conventions and the kind of effects on each half are sort of they're not the same effect. They're almost like polar opposites of each other.
Yeah.
So this was a way for them to use one bit of cardboard and to have one slot in your hand or in your sideboard or in your deck, but actually having multiple effects. So kind of like cards which have modes on them, which have
Charms
become very
almost.
popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead
So
of
all
paying
the
one cost and getting one of three effects, you can pay one cost for one effect or a different cost for a different effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, examples from Invasion Block. I mean, they're not particularly interesting from Invasion Block, other than the fact that they visually look quite cool. So you had things like Stand and Deliver, Fire and Ice. So fairly sort of standard,
Mm.
like opposing naming conventions. Where they really got interesting with these split cards is when they brought them in the Ravnica blocks. Now, each Ravnica block throughout the years has had a version of split cards, and they've kind of refined them based on slightly different mechanics. But I think it's worth this is one of these things which proves to us that the physical act of using these bits of cardboard is a flavorful has a flavorful base to it, because even though it's a mechanic that people use, the way that R&D make these things usable in the game physically comes from a place of style over mechanic. So the Ravnica blocks in Dissension, so the very first Ravnica block had different guilds on each half. So they would have been two color halves to each one, and they would have been different guilds. They would have names like Bound and Determined, or Crime and Punishment.
Or research and development, which is my favorite from the block.
Yeah, very cool. So just completely different guild ideals that I suppose if you were playing in a multicolored deck, or because this would have been before Commander really came about, so it would have all been constructed and limited play. So it was really pushing for you to. I mean, you could either go into three colors or you could stick to two, but it was able to make like drafting experience flow a bit better. If you're opening up like a booster pack, there's only so many slots, and there's 10 guilds. I mean, it would have been 5 and 5, I suppose, but it allows you to have one pick. Say if you're in Rakdos colors, but still be able to, pick a card that had all of colors on it and kind of pick and choose and do whatever you need to do.
Mm.
Really cool. In Dragon's Maze, they brought back the flip cards, but this time they had fuse. So up until this point, if you had a flip card, unless you recurred it, you would have to use one or the other. You couldn't do both effects at
Yeah, no, you
once.
couldn't have both trigger, no.
No, exactly. But
Yeah,
with
I used to tuck.
fuse,
I remember used to tucking research under Icecron Scepter because research only costs 2 mana, but I'd be able to play the 5 mana side off of the imprinted activation. But you couldn't
oh
do.
nice.
Yeah, you couldn't do both. You can do some silly things with split cards
I mean,
sometimes.
it kind of it breeds creativity, right? Because
Mm.
it's still one bit of cardboard, so technically it's still counted in the game as one card. So if you
Yeah,
can keep doing it
100%.
again and again,
Yeah, well, they have like combined mana costs as well. So like a mana cost of research and development is 7 because it's 2 and 5, and you add them together. It's really important for things like which we're not actually going to talk about today, which is weird. But adventure cards, same kind of thing. If you're looking at like making Garuda decks or Bosch decks going forwards, you add the two sides together to make your combined converted mana cost, which allows
I
you to get
think we
around
can
some things.
we can talk about adventure cards, but I think adventure cards. I mean, the adventure cards kind of fall into the split thing.
Well,
But the thing
see,
about
I think it's funny because I think that the venture cards are the more flavorfully, like they tie in more flavorfully to flip cards and transform cards than I'd say split cards do. Because I'd say that split cards, in terms of function and flavor, they more run on things like puns, like turn and burn and fire and ice are like idioms that people know. This is why when they moved, obviously you're going to talk about this in a second, but this is why the initial split cards are a bit more resonant because they use terminology that was way more applicable to most people. Like people knew the terminologies more, whereas you have things like some of the later ones don't necessarily resonate as much. But the main reason why I think that adventure cards are more interesting than say the split cards is because they tell that story a little bit more. like I can't remember what the guy is, the barterer, where you can haggle, to discard a draw a card for a red, and then he's a haggler, a market haggler, which I think tells that story maybe a little bit better. Like say, what's the Beast Beauty and the Beast card? Or Devoted. I can't remember what his name is now.
Love Struck Beast.
That's it, Love Struck Beast. Yeah, the one that makes a 1/1 and then it can't attack unless
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
got.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what.
Um,
But for me, that has more flavour of a flip transform card than say, the split cards do. Maybe.
Okay. Well, I mean, we can get there. Like, I think adventure cards we'll talk about in a second after we get through split cards. Because yeah, you're right. They weren't on our outline, but they are another way in which R&D kind of push the envelope in terms of telling a story. But back to split cards. So the Dragon Maze cards fuse. You can play both sides at the same time. It kind of encourages you to be doing multicolor decks, more than 2 colors as well. The naming conventions with Dragon Maze, you'll see it's things like breaking and entering, or turn and burn. And the thing that I think is really interesting, because we'll see this in Amonkhet as well. Amonkhet also used both sides, where the naming conventions for cards that you could use both halves of, as opposed to just one or the other, are whole phrases and whole
Mm-hmm.
sentences. So it's breaking and entering, which is a term that, as you just said, that everyone knows, because you can say the whole thing in one go. Whereas something like, fire and ice. Fire and ice is a colloquialism because we know that those are opposites, but that's not a term people use. No one says, oh, they're as opposite as fire and ice. Like,
Mm.
it doesn't quite roll off the tongue as well. I think
Plus,
that's
yeah,
quite important.
there's an action aspect to breaking and entering, which feels more like you're doing one thing into the other. Fire and ice are two diametrically opposed things, and again, because it doesn't have fuse, you can't do them together. Well, I like the Dragon's Maze. When they added fuses, they added, as you say, this breaking and entering, and then turn and burn. These are things where you start with one, and then your natural inclination is to follow into the other one, which is why I like this. Yeah, this fuse thing makes you feel like you want to do both together. You don't want to just turn something; you want to turn and burn it. You know,
Mm.
you don't want to just break it. You don't want to just be breaking. You want to be breaking and entering. So I think that idea of where they use that terminology to convey the story of the card and the action of the card and what you want the card to be doing was very clever.
Yeah, really, really cool. And then we move into Guilds of Ravnica, which is the latest set, which I think most players who have been playing now are probably familiar with. So this came just before War of the Spark last year, and they brought back split cards yet again. They had a rare cycle and an uncommon cycle, which is pretty cool. And the whole thing with this set of guilds is that they really explored something which they'd done in previous sets, but they really kind of hammered home in the lore of this set, on the cardboard at least, because they didn't really do it in the stories, but on the cardboard it was fairly clear, is that each guild had the head of the guild, and then they had their sort of lieutenant, their second in command. In the Dragon's Maze block, the Return to Ravnica block, they had this as the Maze Runners, but the Maze Runners, other than just being on their own card, didn't have a lot else going on. Whereas this time around,
Yeah.
the sort of lieutenants of each guild were featured on multiple cards and had multiple sort of instances of recognizability. So for recognizability, I don't know if that's a real word.
It is now. No, yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
know
is
what you
now.
mean. They're much more
So
relevant. I don't
they're
remember
much more
half of the
relevant.
Maze Runners from Maze's End. I don't remember what half of them did. I don't even care.
No, exactly. So you have cards. So, for example, if you have Lazav, who's the Dimir Guildmaster, and you have Atrata the Silencer, who's his second in command, the split cards would have the artworks pretty much formatted the same as before, but you'd have one half would have a Lazav artwork and the other one would have an Atrata artwork. You would have the Izoni for the Golgari, and you'd have Vraska for the Golgari on one card as well. So it kind of tied it all together. And the naming conventions reflected this again. So this isn't fuse, so you can't use both halves at the same time. So they're not necessarily phrases that you'd kind of use that as idioms, but they would use words like find and finality, or incubation and incongruity. I can't say it.
Incongruity.
Thank
I
you
knew
very
as soon
much.
as you started saying, I was like, "Is he going to
My
get this at no?" No, he
God,
didn't.
no, it's a tough word. But the point is that the words are combined or connected through the first 3 letters of each of those 2 words are connected. And this is a really subtle way for the design team to show that even though you're playing one half of the other, and that they have these characters that sometimes in the story have some friction, like Atrata and Lazav, being fucking Dimir, I presume, don't trust each other. But their abilities, whilst they're not the same abilities, are linked through like an overflowing theme that's not just their color identity. And I think for something that's like really throwaway, they really didn't need to add that convention on, and you would miss it if you didn't really look hard enough. But the
I
fact that
hadn't
it's
really thought
there
about that until
is
you just
really
said it
good.
now.
It's really cool. I think it's really nice.
It's
It's
almost like
subtle enough that
signature
it
spells
works.
for them as well, isn't it? Like, 'cause they did the signature spells for all of the Planeswalkers for War of the Spark. It kind of gives you an action card for all of your legends without having to earn a whole extra card. You just put them both on one. Yeah, very
Yeah,
clever. Yeah, and
I really
also
like it.
I think a lot of the naming convention came down to the fact they just ran they ran out of idioms to go for. So they were
Yeah.
like, well, what's the next best thing that we can do? And you go for that alliteration aspect, and it does feel, as you say, it ties the two sides quite nicely together, even if they are very different abilities sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. The next two sets, which I said, well, they're not the next two sets, but the next two sets we're going to talk about very quickly. Plane of Chaos had some split cards as well. This was only interesting because all of the split cards, both halves of each one of them were red, so they
Mm.
were all just mono red split
Yeah,
cards,
it was
which is
like
kind
Rough
of
and
crazy.
Rumble, right? The deal
Hmm
2 damage to each non-flyer or 6 damage to each flyer. I think it is.
hmm
Yeah,
Yeah,
something like
stuff
that.
like that, which was kind of strange. And then Unhinged had split cards, but this of
What?
being
When?
Unhinged.
Why? Really?
Five color split cards, fucking five color split cards. Who, what, when, where, and why is the card.
Yeah.
As you can tell, it's completely
Yeah.
unusable,
How
completely
they could
illegible.
do that, I have no idea.
It's fucking was unhinged, so it's all just nonsense. But it's a really fun idea. They really push the envelope. And then
Yeah.
the last set, which we saw with split cards, as in traditional split cards, is Amonkhet. At least of now, this is a thing that will come back again and again. I feel. So Amonkhet had split cards with the keyword aftermath written on them, and they changed the way they formatted these again. So instead of it being a split card where the only way you could read them was by kind of tapping the card almost to read them all like from kind of side to side.
Yeah.
This
That,
was the top half of the card was as you would recognize it as a normal magic card, so you
mm.
could have it sort of like face up if you like. But then the bottom half was on its side. So this, I think, really helped you understand that the aftermath mechanic, you couldn't use both those halves of the ability out of your hand. It was you used the top half, the right side up half, as the first ability, and then the tapped one was when it was in the graveyard. You could kind of like flash it back for that
Yeah, you
ability.
could almost like
Uh,
prop it on the side of your graveyard so it kind of sits, and because it'd be really hard to tell it was in your graveyard, and you could flash it back. Like old flashback cards always used to have a little tombstone in the top left corner, so you could
mm,
recognize easily what cards you had available in your graveyard. With this, you can, instead of having the top bit that you've already played, you can turn it on its side, tuck it just outside of your graveyard, and it can sit just on. And it still looks weird, but I like the fact they tried. You know?
Yeah, I must admit, out of all the split card designs in terms of traditional split cards, when they released those ones, visually, I think they slightly missed the mark on that because most players, and maybe this is just a colloquialism with like sort of our play groups, I guess, but I think
Mm.
most players, when they use their graveyard to denote exiled cards, they don't use another pile.
No,
They
they do it on the
they
side. Yeah,
tap the cards
yeah.
in the graveyard, which you
The
would think.
unofficial semantics of actual physical gameplay that are never told to you. Which way do you tap your lands? And can you believe that? There's nowhere in the rules where it tells you which way you're supposed to tap them. I know it'd be weird if they did, but why not? You
Mm,
know, why can you like? Because there's nothing to stop you from going. Oh, because officially there's nothing to stop you from tapping at 75%. You know that half tap. I hate the 45-degree angle tap. Screw people who do that. By the way, it really annoys
oh
me.
well, they use that in Magic Arena. That's how they
Yeah,
do it in
I
Magic
don't.
Arena.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I get it, but you know what I mean. It's weird that there is no standard convention for which way you tap beyond the cards saying on them there's a tap in which direction. But I think I even tap the wrong way compared to what the symbol says. I think it says to tap to the right, and I tap to the left. Anyway, that was a weird
Interesting. Well,
segue.
no, no,
Sorry.
no. I think it's one of those things where it's what I can't stand for my own play is when I tap my lands in my left hand, think about what I'm doing, and then I put my hand of cards into my left hand, and then tap my creatures for attacks
Oh
the
god,
other
yeah.
way
Oh, it's already hurts. Just hearing you say it, it's like ouch.
because I tap into my body, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't tap outwardly. I tap inwardly. So yeah, so that happens all the time.
Yeah, my ex-housemate, I used to tap artifacts all one way and then lands the other way every time. And it wasn't until I pointed it out, and then after pointing it out, it just made it even more infuriating because you'd notice
Oh
halfway
man,
through a turn. Um,
ridiculous.
yeah, and also one
Um,
thing to notice with the Amonkhet cards is that they have a slightly different naming convention of where it's not and, it's two, which I
mm.
think communicates more again that process of doing one effect into the other effect.
Yeah, commit to memory. It's
Exactly.
one
Yeah.
sentence that people are aware of. And they're not necessarily polar opposites in this time as well.
No, again,
They
kind of
are
like
different
with the
colours.
turn and burn, it's almost like a process. It's one thing into the other thing.
Yeah, exactly, which I think is really cool.
What
Yeah,
is
I
the
mean,
market one? There's a really good one. Field to market. That's
oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's field to market, and it's the blue. You draw. I can't remember exactly. It's the blue. It's the blue white one, and it's the uncommon version. So I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was little things like that. That little again. If you do cape naming conventions, and we're both like literally minded, so we quite like words and how they sound. And sometimes when you hear certain cards, and I've read Field to Market, I was like, even though Field and Market don't sound like Magic cards, I'm really glad that Field to Market and that process of one card into another card is on a Magic card, because you can't do that outside of some flip cards. You can't do these processes on a card. You can't see something start as one thing and finish as one thing on one bit of cardboard. It just doesn't usually work. I like that aftermath effects. I feel like it tells a story more than, say, your old school split cards would.
Yeah, one of my favorites is failure to comply. So
Oh yeah.
failure is the blue, which is return a spell to its owner's hand, and then comply is choose a card name. Until next turn, your opponents can't cast spells with
Yeah,
that
it's
chosen
great.
card name. So you bounce it back to their hand, and then you name that card, and they can't cast it. So it's really nice that with these ones, as we've said before, whereas in all the other ones, even with the fuse, they did very different things that maybe you could like sync up together, maybe, and then the split cards did wildly different stuff. With these ones, because they expect you to flash it back,
Mm,
you, if you have the mana, can do one thing straight into the next, and
mm.
it's
Like
very
insult
cool.
to injury as well is one of these. I was listening to Vorthos Mike, that they do triptychs for a couple of the cards where the artworks are literally just one long artwork and they split it in two to put it onto the two halves. Insult to injury is one of the obvious ones where they do this, where you see the spell effect go from the Minotaur off to the Mage. But yeah, this again, being able to tell a full story on one card is very impressive, and being able to do it for all of these is great.
Yeah, super cool. Okay, so that is split cards. I mean, there's split cards, as I said before. I don't think they're going to get rid of them. I think they're probably going to be deciduous, which is it's like evergreen. That's a real Magic term. It's not an evergreen
Yeah,
mechanic. It's
yeah,
just one that pops up every now and then, which is
yeah.
pretty
Like
cool.
what did they do with oh god, it's literally left my mind. Sagas aren't going to be
Mm,
specific just to one plane. They will probably do them throughout other planes, just not as much, which I think is fine. It's like legend. I wish they would do a few more. I wish they'd dash a few more legendary sorceries through sets. I thought we were going to see them more after Dominaria, we haven't. I don't know if they're just saving it for a rainy day and they want to bring it back with a big splash, but it's a shame that these kinds of effects you don't see. I wouldn't mind seeing, say, a saga every set, or like an
mm.
aftermath card every set, that kind of thing. I don't think it'd be that bad. And I think it'd be quite cool to see like different effects across different sets. But yeah, this will probably come back. I can't imagine they'll do it very soon because it does take up a lot. So you have to design two. This is another thing we haven't really spoken about, but with all of these, you're designing two cards for one card. So it is essentially taking up twice as amount of space, even though it's only one card, which will take a non-zero amount more effort. So there is that to think about as well. There might only be so much design space they can do with this.
Sure. So morph is the next thing that we're going to talk about. So morph is, well, I say going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it as to why we're not going to talk about it more. Because even though morph cards, which are cards which you can play face down and then flip up for some kind of like surprise effect, it's hidden information. Whereas with all these other
Yeah,
split cards and things like that, it's not hidden information. Even double-sided cards, like the double face cards, or excuse me, that is information which your opponent can look at any time.
yeah, you're allowed to go over and flip it over and have a look at it. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas with morph cards, they did. I think they tried. So you could play it face down, and then they gave you manifest tokens or morph tokens that you put over the top
Mm.
of your face down card, so it was more recognizable as a thing, and to remind you that that's what it was. But I think I don't know, man. Like I don't know. I don't know. Do you agree? Is this because it's a physical way to use the
I
card?
think a face down magic card on the battlefield is something to give most people anxiety anyway. It's like, why is it face
Mm,
down? Oh my god, I don't like it. Yeah, I think. Well, yeah. There's again, thematically, there's a very big difference between morph and transform. Morph's about hiding your intentions, whereas transform and Kamigawa flip cards are more about showing a process, and maybe of metamorphosis, of development, of anything, of betrayal. Like there are so many different ways that we're going to talk about of where cards can thematically transform, and morph isn't doing that. Morph is, yeah, as you say, especially with when we went to Tarkia, it's Ugin's method of masking the magic. The idea is you are, as you say, hiding things, and every single morph is always a 2/2 face down. So it's not there's no oh, this interesting character that's developing to this character. It's like, no, I don't know what it is, and then you flip it up and now I know what it is. So that's not
mm.
necessarily, yeah, it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't necessarily give off the same nuance, the same kind of feel.
No, although I appreciate them using like cards physically in a way which makes you like you are literally hiding the information. So it's things like like something completely different, like a card like Gamble, where you are
Mhm.
literally gambling with the card that you're fetching with Gamble. I'm all about that shit. Like that to me is really cool Magic
Mm.
design, and I like morph cards in their own little bubble. But yeah, they almost made it into this outline, and they only made it in to say that they're not in.
Mm.
And now we're going to move on to the actual subject of this episode, 41 minutes in. double-faced cards. Double-faced cards first came in the Innistrad blocks, unless I'm mistaken,
You are correct.
and this is the transform mechanic. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been in both Innistrad blocks, and each time they brought them back, a little bit like the split cards, they've kind of pushed the envelope. But for the most part, these were designed to tell a story with one creature, because they have things like vampires which can turn into different things or kind of become more evil, if you like, because we have werewolves that have a human side and then a werewolf side, and even things like artifacts, which is super interesting. So an artifact like Elbrus of the Binding Blade,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this
right.
artifact that has a history, and then on the flip side, once a certain stipulation's been met, you transform the blade into the demon which the blade was
Yeah,
concealing.
Withengar Unbound. Oh man.
Yeah, which tells the story of this artifact. And because Innistrad is this plane, which I suppose before they did Eldraine, which was the fairy tale plane, Innistrad kind of filled that idea, because there's, old wives' tales, or there's stories of like Hammer horror creatures, or there's myths and legends surrounding like creatures of the night. This transform mechanic really helped do that. Obviously, for things like werewolves, it's perfect, because a werewolf is literally a human that turns into a wolf. So that kind of storytelling is like almost a given. Like I don't want to like kind of use that as a throwaway. Like I spent half of last episode fucking crying over werewolves and how I wanted them. But that's almost like their obvious usage. If you look at things like
Yeah.
the vampires, for example. So there's a vampire in Shadows over Innistrad, which was in the second Innistrad block. That was a vampire on one side, and then was it vampiric interloper? I don't think that's right, but that's going to say that's what it is. And then on the other side, it was a mist, and it even changed color. So it was black on the front side and then blue wildly on the back, which there were no other blue vampire cards in any of these sets. And on the back, it was a mist that was unblockable. So you could attack in with the vampire, turn it into a mist to make it unblockable before the blockers were announced. And then when they let it through, you can flip the mist back into the
Mm-hmm.
vampire
Yeah,
to do
Elusive
more
Tormentor.
damage.
Yeah.
Elusive Tormentor, thank you, that's it. Oh my god,
Yeah,
man.
this is one of those crazy, crazy, crazy cards, because this is one of the ones I think it was listed recently on the command zone, because on the flip side it's a hexproof indestructible creature, which are two of the most powerful keywords you could put together on a card. I mean, obviously it's a 0/1, but the idea is, yeah, it's telling the story of where in modern culture, I say modern culture, this is probably a bit less, it's probably less modern culture, but back in the day vampires had this idea of where they could disperse into a cloud of bats, or disperse into fog, and basically work their way under your doorways, or through your window, through your cracks in your window, which goes against the other thing of where you have to invite them in. There's a lot of very confusing lore around vampires, surprisingly. But yeah, this idea of where, yeah, this insidious mist, and on the card it's great because it just shows a picture of the window and all this mist pouring over the windowsill coming into the room, and the idea that then you can pay to come. Oh yeah, again, like if you can speak this much about one card, they're clearly doing something right.
And it's all to do with that transform mechanic as well. Like the
Exactly,
transform
yeah.
mechanic really makes it. So yeah, werewolves, vampires, these artifacts as well. Another one which was from Shadows over Innistrad was Neglected Heirloom that turned into Ashmouth Blade. So
Mm,
this transformed. It didn't have its own transform effect. But if you attached it to a creature that then transformed, the artifact transformed with it to become a more powerful artifact, which is just mental when you
mm.
think about it. And then it stays that way. So you can then attach it to something else once it's realized its true potential.
Yeah, it's funny because when it first came out, obviously I think they showed. I can't remember exactly which card they previewed first, off the top of my head, because obviously that's years ago. But the way I look at it, um, the thing is, I think they originally, when they were making it, they had to obviously make this way that make werewolves work. And then once they had this premise and they knew they were going to go with it, this idea of flipping day and night kind of aspect, then they look to see, okay, if we're going to do this with werewolves, that's a fairly typical way: humans during the day, werewolves during the night. Where else can we push this idea? And I think that's part of why we've ended up with such some really truly inspired cards. And I'm glad that it all started with the basic kind of werewolf thing, because I was looking through expecting it mostly to be, yeah, okay, werewolves, yeah, okay, more werewolves, and actually it's probably only about maybe 30%, maybe 40% are actually werewolves. Like, there's a lot of non-werewolf transform cards, which is good, because it means I'm glad that they took something that had a very, or felt like it had a narrow thematic implication, and they're able to go, oh, actually no, we can do so much with this.
Absolutely. This is also Innistrad is where they also introduced flip walkers, which is really interesting as well. The original Innistrad set had Garruk, which was the green Garrick that flipped into the Golgari Garrick. I mean, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. The front
Yeah,
side is mono green, and the back side is green and black. Yeah.
which is crazy.
Mm.
Like, not only, and it's crazy even by Planeswalker that flips standards, because it flips into a Planeswalker that's different colors. It's
Yeah.
not even just, which is mad. And obviously that story is telling the story of Garrick getting cursed by the Chain Veil in Liliana and being on Innistrad, kind of stumping around, being all angry about that. Which was it's just a wild thing to think about, that you could have this Planeswalker that flips into something else completely.
Oh yeah. When it first came out, mate, honestly, people lost their minds.
Yeah, I can
It was
imagine.
crazy. 'Cause essentially, it's two walkers in one. That's mental.
Yeah. Arlen Cord is one that obviously came through in Shadows of Innistrad. Arlen Cord's pretty notable because not only was this a Planeswalker that flipped, which was, by this point, we'd had Magic Origins, which we'll talk about in a second, so it wasn't totally new, but the fact that it was a Planeswalker that flipped, that you could then transform back, because all the werewolf creatures could transform from one side to another with different
Mm,
stipulations. She's a werewolf Planeswalker, so one of her Planeswalk abilities is that you do that Planeswalk ability, and she flips back to being a human,
mm.
which is something which, this is even a deeper dive, because on the werewolf cards, you're not necessarily in charge of whether your werewolf flips, because it's if someone plays more than 2 spells on their turn.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have as much agency. Yeah. You don't.
No, your werewolves kind of flip with the whims of what everyone else is doing, which can be frustrating, or can just be an extra challenge for them if they don't want your werewolves to flip. But because Arlen Cord, as a character, is someone who can change her form at will, the fact that you literally have the power to change her back and forth when you fucking want to is bonkers clever and so cool. It's so
Yeah, Garrick was
cool.
stuck. Once you flip him, there's no way to come back.
Yeah,
And even on his card, his initial front side, all it is you can see he starts on 3. You can't plus him up. Anytime he dips below 3 loyalty, you flip him. It's an inevitability. You're going to end up with a veil cursed Garrick by the end of this. Whereas with Arlen, you get, as you say, a bit more freedom to be able to choose as you want to. Which is very cool. It's a bit. I mean, I remember doing this with Huntmaster of the Fells when it first came out. Because it's one of the few cards, one of the few werewolf cards you could kind of play competitively. And its ability to be able to flip back and forth and have an effect every turn, it feels so powerful. You're just doing everything off one card. Yeah, very cool. Very
Eldritch Moon also brought in another new mechanic with. So this is still in the Innistrad blocks. So Eldritch Moon, which is the latest Innistrad block that we've had, brought in Meld with their transform cards. Now, what Meld did, there was 3 pairs of cards, and each of those had meld, but they melded with each other. So you had, say, for example, you had the land, which was Hanweir Battlements,
cool.
and you had the creature Hanweir Garrison. So this is an example. When you had both of these on the battlefield, you paid a certain amount of mana for its meld cost, and then you flipped the cards over to their back sides, their asses. So you flip them over to the card which is on the other side, and it's just half of the art of a jumbo-sized card
Yeah,
that you would then push together to make one fucking giant card,
yeah.
which had some bonkers ability. So Hanweir Garrison, Hanweir Battlements turns into Hanweir the Writhing Township. Crazy.
The funny thing about these as well is you've technically got 2 cards in one card. In fact, it's a flip card, so you've got 2 cards in one. But then you've got these 2 cards that flip into one card. So you've got 2 cards that are 2 cards, but when you flip them over, they become 1 card.
They're just one card.
Yeah.
People didn't respond to this one as
Again,
well.
aesthetically, it's a bit
Aesthetically,
weird.
it wasn't great.
Yeah, because when you have them in sleeves, obviously we've ignored the massive elephant in the room. We'll talk about this in a bit. But yeah, obviously when you when you have them in sleeves and you put them back in the sleeves and next to each other, they don't quite meet because obviously the artwork. If weirdly enough, looks wise, when you have these cards in play, they look really cool. It does look strange because they're double sized, but the thing is, the artwork's all the full card. There's no border or anything. It's literally right up to the edge of the card of the artwork. So it does. Again, it's one of these things that because it's not something we're used to. I think our brains automatically have a bit of an aversion to it because they don't want to anything new. Typically, we don't want to. It doesn't fit in quite as comfortably. So you look at a meld card and you go, "Oh God, what's that?" No, I'm okay, thank you. But actually, when you do get to in the amount of games, because we've both got decks that have the Hanweir Writhing Township in them, and I think between the two of us, we've maybe melded twice. Um, yeah, so it's one of these things of where it feels like you're accomplishing something mechanically and thematically when these things happen. Not only if the stars align in your commander deck that you've got 2 singleton cards that have managed to find their way in your hand at the same time, but you get to do the thing to make them into the thing together. Yeah, it's very cool. What's the other? Was Brazil? Oh, what's the bloody angel?
So it's Bruna and Gisela becomes Brazilda, the
Brazil. That's it. Yeah.
Emrakul's voice or something like that.
If you want nightmare-inducing artworks, that might be up there. That might be one of the best
Mhm.
ones for it. Holy shit!
And one of the really interesting things about Eldritch Moon as well, other than just the meld mechanic, because they only did it with those 3 pairs. The other one's Chittering Rats and Graft Diggers or something or other. No one ever plays it. It was jank, but it's there. Is that the no one ever did. No one did it. Is that they also had a lot of the transform cards, like the werewolves, for example, or vampires, that they still had the transform, but because Emrakul's influence at that point on Innistrad was so great, they transformed into Eldritch, Eldrazi versions of themselves. So they were colorless border. So they went from a colored creature into a colorless one, which might have had colored mana pips in its activated cost or something. So it was a merge. Oh no, a merge
Yeah,
was
I
something
don't think any
different.
of them do. I've looked through them all today, and I'm pretty sure none of them have a coloured activatability on the flip side. Also, the interesting thing is that they're werewolf horrors on their front side, and when they've fully realised that transformation into an Weemrakul, into a werewolf, it goes, and they're Eldrazi werewolves. So they lose that horror side. They keep the werewolf side of them. They're just Eldrazi werewolves.
Oh
Which,
man,
when you think about
chef's
that, an
kiss.
Eldrazi werewolf is not very nice. And then you look at the artworks and you realise, yes, no, they're not very nice. They are
So
horrible.
the Eldrazi werewolves, and a bit like Brizella as well, when you flip them
Mm,
over, they had that really sort of like lattice,
yeah, proper
Emrakul lattice.
mutation.
The vampires, they still had a little bit of that, but mostly they had like extra fucking limbs
Oh god,
and
what's the one I was looking at today? Yeah, let me find it quickly. Abolisher of bloodlines.
mm,
Hmm. Now, already on the regular side, because basically what they did was they kind of set the standard in Innistrad of what they can do with your typical expectations from transform cards. The one of the ones we didn't mention is like there's a Jekyll and Hyde card in there, which is very clever to see this transform from a scholar into this brute and back and forth. That kind of idea. This is where they could push it outwards. What they did with Shadows of Innistrad is they kind of hinted at there's probably some weird stuff going on. Some of the flips were still okay. All of the artworks had maybe something kind of strange. When it got to Eldritch Moon, they went throw that out the window. There's even a thing where one of the flavor texts where it goes, it's weird to think that I miss the days of seeing werewolves, and on the flip side it goes, or anything that even resembles them. And it's one of these things of where Innistrad, which was already full of these horrible, like, so your humans transform into these horrible werewolves at night. Oh my god, no. Your base level is werewolves that are transform into these monstrous Cthulhu things. Yeah, fucking hell, honestly, like they really did push the boat out. And again, yeah, artwork wise, some of them are horrible.
yeah, I mean they're just absolutely brilliant. So we'll move on from the Innistrad planes in terms of what they do, because I think Innistrad, the blocks have the most sort of high intensity of having these flip cards.
Yeah.
And you know they're there to look them up.
It's the
Just
werewolf
so
set, isn't it? They'd run amiss if they didn't go back and do some werewolves that had the typical where the mechanic came from kind of thing.
Sure, but there were even things like there were like enchantments that had it as well, and even like cards like Delver of Secrets, which is a blue
Oh
wizard
yeah, we'll get
that
when
turns
we
into a
talk about
blue
our wins.
insect.
We're going to come back to Innistrad, don't you worry.
Oh, sure, cool. Some Origins, Magic Origins, which came before Shadows over Innistrad, but was obviously after the original Innistrad block, had Flip Walkers as well. Flip Walkers is a bit of a dumb name for these because they're not flip cards;
Yeah,
they're
I
double
think of
face
them as
cards.
Origins walkers. I mean, I know they are technically flip walkers, but yeah, it just sounds weird.
Yeah. So these had the 5 Flip Walkers, which had the Gatewatch members. So Nissa, Chandra, Jace, Gideon, and Liliana. I almost forgot. That just shows how much I fucking care about the Gatewatch.
Because he's dead,
And
no one cares. He's gone. Forget.
no one's fuck it. And these had them in a creature form, and then they flipped them over into a planeswalker, which was a really nice way of telling the story of how they're spark ignited and they were a
Yeah.
creature. They follow some stipulation on the creature, and it's different from all of them, and then they flip into a planeswalker. They're fairly interesting. The thing which
Mm,
I take away from them though is that this was a real push, not only in doing this kind of retconning of the story and origins, just from a lore perspective, or the fact that they did a core set that was solely dedicated to telling stories and kicking off stories, is the fact that the Planeswalkers showed that this was the first real big step in a long time for Magic to go, we are a card game, but we are also really interested in telling the story
mm,
like well. I mean, they've been doing stories since they've been printing cards. I'm not
mm,
suggesting they haven't. But this was a real show of strength for them to go, no, for the next like 10 years or so, we're really going to fucking hammer the story.
mm.
They've had margins of success, but this was a real sort of like big signifier for it.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's a very cool.
It almost felt like everything leading up to Origins was like in terms of the transform mechanic was a preamble for them to be able to do this.
Yeah.
Because for me, it was one of these things where you'd never have thought in a million years you were going to get to see Liliana before she got all weird and sexy, or you weren't going to see like say. No one knew that Gideon's name was Kithian unless you were paying a lot of attention. When Theros came around and you read Kithian Eora in, I can't remember what the card is, but there's one flavor text that has Kithian Eora in it. Unless you were super clever and and had the obsessive qualities that we do, where you go across it and scroll through every single flavor text. It was really cool to see him had a different name when he was a kid. Nissa was the least important because she was a racist before they decided to make that not a thing anymore. But yeah, this idea of being able to, it felt like they knew they wanted to do this restart the story thing for a long time, and they kind of wanted it to kick off from Planeswalkers because they love that being like the face of their IP. But they would have never been able to do these kinds of cards had they not already had the preamble of showing, okay, so what do we do? Is there any way for us to start a Planeswalker in one state and then they finish in another state? And then if we can do that, obviously they did this with Garruk, can we not then do this with Sparks Igniting? And obviously it's the first time and only time we've seen it beyond one other instance. But I would love to see this more in the future, of where we see, like, say, Luca. I think Luca, we should have seen a Flipwalker version of Luca, because we meet him in the middle of the beginning of the story without being a Planeswalker, and by the end of the story, he's a Planeswalker. But this was, yeah, a really good example of them showing how they can tell a story on a card. And going forwards, I'd love to see them do some things of where, say, like, Azor when he was a Planeswalker, and then once he gives up his spark to the Immortal Sun, and then he's the creature afterwards, that kind of thing.
I think genuinely that whenever they have a new planeswalker introduced, they should give them a flipwalker.
Right?
I
Why not?
think they should make that leap.
I
Like
mean,
Huatli could have been a flipwalker.
again, we always
Saheeli could have been a
say this nice
flipwalker.
and easily, but there is a massive thing with printing issues when it comes to flip cards, because the ways the sheets work, you can't just have one or two walkers in the set and flip cards in the set. It just doesn't work with the print sheets. I know they did it with the Bolus card coming up in a second we'll talk about. I don't know how they managed to get around that. I'd have to have a look around. But
Well, I mean, okay, maybe, but then all right then. So maybe not every
I'm not saying I
single
disagree with
set.
you. I think they should just fuck it, put more effort in, do it. I don't care.
Sure. Maybe not every new planeswalker that we get to see. Maybe every planeswalker that in the story has a spark ignite. So Luca's a good example, like you just said there. Calyx, whatever the fuck his name was.
Right. See, I'd have loved to have seen a Calyx legendary card. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And Huatli from Ixalan.
Yeah.
The other one is M19, the core set. We had Nicobolas get a Flipwalker card as well because it was his origin story. Didn't get one for Ugin.
No, I was literally about to rage. I'm so glad you got there first. I was about to flip.
Why didn't we get one for Ugin?
Because it was Bolas' story. And also, again, I think printing-wise, they were able to get away with having one, but having two would have been a big issue. And this is why I said it just a second ago, because having one, I think, is fine the way that they can structure it, but having two would have been a big issue. I remember in my headspace that there was a conversation about this, because I remember getting really up in arms about them not doing an Ugin card, and part of the conversation was the matter of the logistics of printing. So there is something to be said for that, and it was, as we say, Bolas' story. So even though we didn't need a seventh Bolas and we needed a second Ugin.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And then Ixalan also had a run of flip cards. This is the sort of
spicy.
Well, Ixalan's really interesting. So Ixalan, they had a bunch of flip ones, and they were artifacts, vehicles, and enchantments rather than creatures. None of the creatures did it. Vehicles, technically creatures, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But this is a really interesting one, because the whole theme of this wasn't necessarily like things reaching a potential or things reaching, you're not playing like trying to play both halves. The whole thing about Ixalan is that you're exploring new territory, and all these different factions, whether it's the vampires or the pirates or whatever else, were pushing into the unexplored realms of Ixalan. So you'd have the stories kind of unfold, and some of them were more lore based. So Search for Azcanta, for example, was maybe a bit the thematic compass. These things were like more thematic. But then you also had things like Vanquish's Galleon became Vanquish's Stronghold. The idea that these ships dock up and then the vampires use their big galleons as the basis for their home ports. Really cool.
That's so cool. To me, that's like an environmental process. It's not you as an individual character going through a process or a mutation. It's the world. Obviously, we are going from having a ship to having land. Like, you're literally creating a settlement. Like, there's a really good example with Vance's blasting cannons, where it reads at the bottom of where basically she lays siege. What's oh god, Vance, was it? I can't remember the first name. Anyway, Captain Vance lays siege to an island, and then because they've created such a large crater, they would just put the settlement inside it instead. And anyway, you can argue flavor-wise, maybe cannons aren't really an enchantment, but the idea is almost like this process. You're undergoing like the blood fast, for example. You're undergoing a ritual. You're going through a process to eventually end up with that. And realistically, this is how like settlements and things would work. It would have to be like, you know, an explorative process. As much as I can't see like, say, I wouldn't be able to see like a sorcery on instant being able to transform into a land. Like mechanically, just wouldn't work, which is why they had to go with these vehicles, enchantments, and artifacts and things like that. But the idea is, yeah, this process, this thing, and whether it's the vehicle or the enchantment or your gumption or whatever that leads you to more land, to this area, to this settlement. That is brilliant in my mind.
It's even something as simple as a treasure map. You have your treasure map, you pay one, you tap it, and you scry. So you're looking for information, you're scouring your map, you're using the map to gain more information, and you get a treasure. So maybe you get a little bit of information, maybe you find a bit of treasure. And then you get a certain amount of treasures, you flip it over into Treasure Cove
Mm-hmm.
that you can then tap to sacrifice the treasures to draw cards. So you're getting
Yeah,
multiple benefit from your treasure tokens.
and it's just
Something I didn't
process.
mention
Yeah, it's very
yeah, something I
clever.
didn't mention about these Ixalan flip cards is that they're all artifacts, enchantments, and whatever else that turn into lands.
Yeah.
So the flip side is always a land,
Mm.
a legendary land as well. So it's all about destinations.
Exactly. Yeah, it's as you
Yeah.
say, that destination, that going and finding some new land is literally what you're doing. Very clever. Very
So that's kind of like it's not a not so brief history on all these different things. I will say about the Eldraine cards, they weren't
Can I
on the
just say,
original
Andy,
outline.
I love your little show note. I totally forgot that Argyll's Bloodfast transformed. Karlov has never let me have more than 5 life at the start of my upkeep. I was going to write exactly the same thing down because I've never found myself in a position where I've had that little life. So I just cut
No,
it out recently. I was like, I've like semi-transparent sleeves, and I realised I could kind of see halfway through, and I was like, it's not worth it. I've never transformed it. I might as well forget. You might as well just take that bit of text off of it.
honestly, I only remembered because I researched the
Yeah,
cards for
right.
this.
Yeah, because you don't use it for that. Use it for the greed effect more than
Yeah,
anything.
exactly.
Yeah, don't worry. Some
Um,
of them feel more tacked on, but yeah.
Yeah. So the adventure cards from Eldraine, I suppose they really do fit into this because I've looked up Lovestruck Beast, and Lovestruck
Mm.
Beast is, I mean, it does tell a story.
You know
So
what I
the
mean? This is
adventure,
what I only thought about it when we were talking about split card. Talking about aftermath because it does have that thing of where you go from one effect into the other. Some of them
yeah,
don't have as much of a quote unquote story, where as opposed to just naturally you make 3 pigs and I can't remember what the piggy one, the one where you make you've got 3 pigs and when they die you make 3. I can't remember. Anyway,
the thing that's interesting about these is that they're a creature card that have like a page graphic on them, which is the sorcery or the instant that you use. But then when they go on an adventure, they get put into an adventure zone essentially, and then you can play them back
the
out as
adventure
creatures.
zone.
Yeah, so Lovestruck Beast is so the sorcery is Heart's Desire, and is create a 1/1 white human creature. And then the Lovestruck Beast ability is Lovestruck Beast can't attack unless you control a 1/1 creature. So it creates its lover, and then it can only do things if its lover is still around. I
Mm.
mean, presumably the token you've made, any 1/1
Do you know
human will
what's
do.
funny as well? Is that this is Love Struck Beast. You make this lovely dame, and then in a turn cycle, he doesn't realise, but the dame's died, and you've made a goblin. He's like, "Yeah, all right, she'll do. That'll do."
Yeah, that's fine.
Whatever. Flavor wise, what a win.
I know. So this is, I mean, I mean, these Eldraine cards just go to show where they are willing to use
Yeah,
the kind of different things, but it's all from a flavor perspective.
exactly. Yeah, it's all a process on the card. Like it's telling a story from, as I say,
Yeah,
beginning, middle, and ends. Like you don't get that on all cards, and most
this
cards don't
isn't
have
this
the
isn't the
ability to.
font that they use. This isn't where the set symbol is. This isn't how big they make the artist's name. This is how they physically use the cards to
Mm.
get you as a player to intuitively use the cards in the way that they want to be
Mm.
expressed. And
Ah,
I think it's just fucking
it's
great.
funny that you say that because you say the word intuitive. Yet again, when these first came out, there was a bit of pushback because they were a bit confusing. And the problem with
I
all of
mean,
these
that's fair.
different formats is obviously to a Magic player who spent however many countless hours per day, week, year staring at Magic cards, whenever they do something new, it will take a bit of adjustment. These were very easily absorbed in, though. I think it really helped they did the showcase treatment for them as well.
Mm.
I think that put a lot. They did. To be fair, they did this with the one thing to mention with the flip cards from Mixerlines, they were originally going to be the expeditions of the set. They were originally going to do things like Demonic Tutor and stuff like that, which is why if you look on the flip side, the card style is very, very different. That was going
Yeah.
to be the treatment they were going to give the showcase cards for Ixalan, but didn't. So we're quite lucky that we got to have those more readily available because they're a really pretty version on the other side. It's almost like paper effects, almost like a map, like you're a cartographer. So yeah, so that was just something to mention that I didn't.
Yeah, the practicality of the double face cards is something that we, as you say, we've kind of been avoiding. The fact that you have to have a double face card which has information on the back means that if you sleeve them up in tournament sleeves, you
Mm,
can't use tournament sleeves that are in any way transparent,
yeah.
even a little bit, and you have to take them out of the card. If they're double sleeved, fine, but then you're getting your double sleeve dirty. So that means the only way you can use these cards is if you take them out. This is the big thing with werewolf decks when people, because if you have one or two cards, say if you're playing commander and in your 99 you have two cards that are flip cards, and most commander decks will have one of the Ixalan cards, for example, because the lands are really
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah.
And like, sort of big creatures like Bloodline Keeper and Lord of Lineage, the vampire from the original Innistrad block. That's a very common vampire card. It's something that we spoke about last episode. But if you have one or two, fine. But if you have a whole werewolf deck where every creature is a flip card and then every other enchantment's a flip card, what do you do? Do you have a deck which has check cards in them? Do you have transparent sleeves? What do you do? Yeah, this is the practicality which I think they've tried to solve with things like the adventure cards, where they didn't do, because they could have easily done those as
Yeah,
double-faced.
exactly. Yeah, there's no having to tangibly flip a card over and mess around with it. It's all just right there in front of you on the main card. Yeah.
So this is something that they're going to have to maybe fix, or maybe they don't fix it and we just fucking suck it up. Like, I think that's kind of actually what the answer is.
I think they're suck up territory. Yeah, they've clearly done it over what, 1, 2, 5 different sets of cards that have been
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, clearly it's not ideal. I mean, because the problem is, again, if you do if part of the reason why I don't like this idea of having like most of the cards in your deck being checklists, not only are they all from different sets, you might not be able to find the checklists easily. That's a very minor problem of it. You can just write anything on it. But in your hand, you've got a hand of cards that aren't the cards. If you know what I mean. And the problem is that if you double sleeve, it's fine, because you tend to double sleeve with the clear sleeves, so it's still protected. You don't have to worry too much about it getting scuffed up. Obviously, there's still the process to go through. But I think after this point, as long as they spatter around a little bit, and because we're probably not going back to Innistrad for a while, considering it's probably pretty fucked up for a while. Considering that they had such a dearth of them in Innistrad, it did feel a little bit. It was a bit difficult sometimes in this, because you had so many different cards that you had to flip all the time. As you say, if you've only got one or two, it's not a problem. And I think they're only going to be releasing one or two going forwards. So I feel like if you're going to be playing a werewolf deck, you're going to be making your bed, so you've got to damn well lay in it.
I agree, and I think I'm kind of happy about that. One thing we have not really spoken about, and for to touch on very lightly, it's more of just a neat touch than something that you can dive too deep on. Is the symbols?
Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad we didn't talk about it up until now. Yeah, it's one of the things originally that really annoyed me, and now going through today researching, actually, and my frown has turned upside down.
So with double-faced cards, there was a symbol in the top left-hand corner which denoted which side of the card it was. Because say if you take it out of the sleeve, you flip it over and you push it back in. Other than the fact that the flip side doesn't have the mana symbol in the top right-hand corner, the top left-hand corner has another symbol, and it changes with how the cards are and what sets they are. So, for example, in the Innistrad blocks, it would have a sun and a moon. A crescent moon to denote which side it was on.
Yeah, the initial thing, literally daytime, nighttime, all fitting around this idea of werewolves flipping backwards and forth between day and night.
Yeah, really cool. And then in the Eldrazi-based cards in Shadows, in Eldritch Moon, it was Emrakul was the symbol on the flip side, which showed
the front side, and then when you flipped it over, it had this weird little squiggly, little tadpole-looking thing up in the top left. Weird enough, the ones that think someone like Ulrich still has the day and night because he's unaffected by Emrakul. This was the touch that made me really happy, because I thought they were just going to do a blanket, everything's just sun and moon, you know. And then when I was looking at Shadows, I was like, oh, not only have they kept the sun and the moon for the ones that aren't affected by Emrakul, but for the ones that are affected by Emrakul, they've specifically done an Emrakul one for it. So you can kind of even almost show story-wise which ones are being affected by her influence. Yeah, and then they did it even more different in Ixalan, which is again quite cool.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's just a really neat touch, and it's a way to make Magic cards just visually work for what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I like it's the transform cards outside of the physicality of having to pull them out your sleeve, flip them around, do all that shit. Double-faced cards, I think, are one of the greatest achievements of Magic design. Just full stop. Like the way that they've used them, and they've used them for things that could use them very literally. You know, they've used them for their vampires, and they've used them for their werewolves, and they've used them for their walkers to show like, two halves of sort of a personality. The breakout was them using it for Ixalan, which, as you said, things got fucking spicy.
Yeah.
But where in the future, if they came up to you, Nathan, the eponymous they at WotC, and said, we're going to make this is a deciduous mechanic. We're going to have flip cards in, say, every second or third set, and maybe in things like commander products or whatever. How would you want them to use it? If you could give me maybe two examples of ways that you want them to use it in the future that you would want to see.
I can see an equipment that it goes through enough modifications to become a vehicle.
That's cool.
So it starts off. I can't think of something off the top of my head, but say, for example, I mean, it's going to be difficult because now that we have vehicles, some of the more vehicular equipments from back in the day, like say like kite sail or whatever like that. Like so, it starts with a kite sail as an equipment, and then you say if you're I don't know again I have to think of off the top of my head, but say add a couple of charge counters to it. Once it gets 3 charge counters, it becomes a fully equipped like aeroplane or whatever. That kind of thing I
Yeah.
can see. I like the idea of them going back and revisiting creatures turning into enchantments. This idea of you start off as a living, as a normal human being, or as we'll talk about this in one of the flavor wins, but actually we won't. I'll do it right now. There's a witch in Shadows over Innistrad that when she dies, she becomes an enchantment that afflicts the opponent. And the idea is who
Yes.
down
Yeah.
and does
She's
it.
very cool.
That's one of these things that I think they should move more in towards. I think the idea, the original thing that hung me up on Transformers, that it felt too closely tied to werewolves, and the fact that it had to do this flip back and forth, and it had direct connotations to day and night cycle. Now the fact they've moved away from this, the fact they can go back and check some of the things they did before and go, okay, how can we broaden this out? If you can turn artifacts that have to become creatures that have to attack, that then become lands, and that works, then I don't know what you can't do.
Yeah, I agree.
I can't. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of the first thing I thought of was this. The idea of like an equipment that becomes a vehicle, or I'd like the idea of this creature that becomes an enchantment, like leaves behind like a curse or whatever. That'd be quite cool.
Yeah, that cursed witch card is
Mhm.
really very sweet, and yeah, just goes to show that when they want to tell a story on a cardboard, they can. One of the things that I really want to see them do with the transform mechanic is actually in ancillary products like the Commander Precons, for example, or maybe in any kind of Horizons sets that they bring out, where they have legendary creatures from older planes. I mean, they're doing Commander Legends, they're doing This Is the Year of Commander. This is what we were talking about last week, where if they do all these legendary creatures from planes that we want to maybe revisit, but we can't have a whole block, or maybe individual characters that they want to kind of touch on. Is that any Lorwyn characters that maybe didn't get a fair run the
Oh,
first
that's
time,
clever.
or maybe if they
Yeah,
want to have, maybe if they want to do another Sig card, they don't then need to do 2 cards.
yeah.
Yeah,
Go back to Lorwyn and just do a whole fucking flip set.
yeah, just do a Lorwyn and a Shadowmoor set.
But,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
that's
that'd be
what I
really.
want to see.
But yeah, they could do this. So the thing is, they could do this with a lot of different planes. There are so many different planes that go through, again, quote unquote, a process that you could apply this to. Yeah, I'd be interested to see. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, the Lorwyn one would be really interesting. Again, I don't. It's annoying that it won't go back. So much lost potential. But yeah, that would be really cool if they could do at some point in the future a Lorwyn Shadowmoor based on flip cards. That'd be really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we can stop it there. Guys, if you have any of your favorite flip cards that you want to talk to us about, get in contact. If there's anything that you would want to see be used with flip cards in the future, please let us know. You can find us on Twitter at mtflavouring. Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. You can find me at Andy Manface. Nathan, your Twitter is
At the Fox and the Moon.
the Fox in the Moon. We've started we've been testing the waters with other kinds of media. So there's one sort of video series that we're testing out called Magic the Flavouring Presents Scoops,
Hashtag
which are a
Scoop.
series, hashtag Scoops, which are a series of shorts based on gameplay and all different kinds of things. So if you want to check those out, the 2 pilot episodes for that, I say episodes, they're like 20 seconds on
Yeah.
each, are on our Twitter page. So please go and hook us up there. We are also going to have a few exciting episodes coming up in the next couple of weeks as well, guys. We're not going to say too much now, but you will definitely want to tune in over the next couple of weeks because we have got some pretty exciting things on the way, and we will let you know what those are once everything's been in the can, because you never want to count your chickens
You don't
before
want
they've
to finalise
hatched.
it and then go, well, Armageddon happened. Oops.
Yeah, exactly. But other than that, Nathan, is there anything that you want to say?
No, I'm gonna say because we didn't really get a chance to. Yeah, send over your favorite transform cards if you have any ones that are particularly close to your heart. Otherwise, no, as always, keep well, be happy, do good.
Absolutely. Well, guys, as ever, as always, we have been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.